This video is made possible by the realistic online game War Thunder. Check out this game through the link in the description below. Going through that link does really help support this show and helps us keep making these daily videos, but you also get something in exchange for that. You get a free premium tank or aircraft and 3 days of premium time as a bonus just for registering. Let's get into it. So today we are answering a viewer question because Willow T asks us, is it true that you soil yourself when you die? Depending on your current religious affiliation, at the moment of death, a number of things may happen to your soul, from being judged by Anubis to being conscripted to kick an endless amount of ass for the glory of Odin in Valhalla. The things that happen to your body, however, are a little bit less than metal. This brings us around to our viewers' never-ending quest to get the authorities investigating our search history, because today we're answering, do people really poop their pants directly after death? Alright, so enter the picture, mortician Caitlin Doughty. Said Doughty, it depends on how much poop you have to give. I don't have an exact scientific percentage of how many people poop when they die, but it does happen. Unfortunately, as far as we could find, nobody has ever done a scientific study on the frequency of pooping after death, and peeing, as it turns out, which also happens with some measure of frequency. But in our quest to find reasonably authoritative figures anyway, even if anecdotal, we reached out to longtime paramedic and co-host of the phenomenal, by the way, and hilarious podcast Medical Confessions, Scott Hiskey, friend of the channel as well. Scott, in turn, reached out to his many medic colleagues and is no doubt now destined for a meeting with HR for some sort of sensitivity training for proper use of work email. However, let's get to the important question of what was their consensus as to the frequency of pooping after death. Oh, the lengths we go to. Universally, they almost all qualified their response with, depends on what they died from. However, the general consensus among this sample set was that people poop themselves somewhere between 20 to 50% of the time, either directly before or sometime after death. For a subset of direct quotes in response to this query, said Scott, if someone just went to the bathroom prior to death, maybe not. If they have renal problems, probably not urine in their bladder. Should the cause of their death be anaphylaxis or an organophosphate poisoning, then I'd say that the number is way higher, like 80 to 90%. In the end, this is something that happens often enough that we don't really pay any attention to it other than to advise everyone in the room, be careful, code brown, and then move on from there. Another medic stated, oh god, I hate the poop. I'd say 80% when it happens, it sticks in my mind more. But if I'm being honest, probably around 50%, but I just pay attention so much I'm probably only remembering the times that it happens. But really, it depends on the cause. I'd say if they have some sort of allergic reaction, then I'm expecting it, or if they're wearing a Depends, then I'm just assuming it happened because they can't control it anyway. In that case, don't bother looking and let the coroner deal with it. In yet another case, one medic had a wife who was a nurse, and their consensus was, it depends on why they died. I'd say if the cause of death was allergic reaction, then probably gonna happen, but really it depends on the cause. I'd say 20 to 30%. So seemingly from these and several other responses, somewhere in the ballpark of 20 to 50% seems to be the consensus for pooping either directly before or sometime after death, though none of them have ever bothered to keep track. That said, with our posed question, there is some thought to discreetly start tallying it over the next year or so to get a good sample size and then publish a legitimate study for science. So this all brings us around to why does this actually happen? To begin with, despite there being a specific moment in which you might be considered to have expired from a legal standpoint, the process of your body as a whole dying takes a surprising amount of time, during which various parts of you continue to function to some extent. We'll have much more on this in an upcoming video, looking more broadly at what happens when you die, but for now it turns out that the muscles retain a degree of functionality after death. In fact, some bodies are capable of displaying reflexive actions long after death, depending on how exactly the person expired. While mostly limited to minor spasms and shudders, bodies have been known to kick and even sit bolt upright long after death, under the right circumstances. And that's not to mention the groans that can be exhibited, which is not totally uncommon. More pertinent to the topic at hand, biological processes such as digestion will continue on some level immediately after death. For this, you can think of your digestive tract, that path between your mouth and your anus, a system that is essentially outside your body, just contained within it. Each different part, it breaks down foods differently. But you probably already knew all about that. What you might not know is how the system of transport actually works. The body gets food through your long digestive tube via waves of muscle contractions called peristalsis that run a few inches at a time and all the way down your digestive tract. These waves of muscle contractions also serve to mix and churn foods, liquids, and other digestive juices together. The resulting cocktail is called chyme. The contractions themselves, they're not really too dissimilar to how your heartbeat works. It's fluctuation of electrical potential in the smooth muscle cells which causes the muscles to contract in a rhythmic fashion, in this case being called the basic electrical rhythm, or BER. This rhythm is about 3 times per minute in the stomach and around 12 times per minute in the small intestines. The noises that you hear are the result of these muscular contractions mixing and moving the chyme along, as well as pushing any resultant air through your system. From your stomach, the chyme goes to the small intestine, where most of the nutrients that come from our food get absorbed into the bloodstream by a process called diffusion. What is left over is then passed to the large intestine, whose main job is the absorption of water that remains in the indigestible residue of food. A smaller role of the large intestine is also to break down polysaccharides, fiber, that gets passed into it. This brings us to the literally trillions of microbes hanging out in your gut. They cannot, at least initially, that you've shuffled off this mortal coil, and they continue doing their thing in the immediate aftermath of your death. Among other things, this may, in some cases, result in a significant amount of gas being formed. For example, consider what happens when you consume oligosaccharides, such as are in beans. Oligosaccharides are basically sugar molecules that are made up of several different types of monosaccharides, usually 2 to 10 to form a polymer. An enzyme that would break down these molecules does not exist anywhere inside the human body naturally, but fret not, when they enter the large intestine, they serve as food for the countless microbes present. This is important for our health, as these bacteria are necessary for creating different vitamins that get absorbed into our body, as well as for the production of antibodies that help fight off certain types of infections. The downside is that the gaseous side effect of these bacterial processes tends to clear rooms everywhere. And in the case of being dead, well, that gas has to go somewhere. Thus, bodies can sometimes not just belch, but also fart for a long time after death, a fact that presumably gives morticians everywhere plausible deniability if they ever let one go at work. Of course, farting isn't necessarily pooping, though the occasional shart does happen even after death, helping this process along simultaneous to death, while some muscles in your body may tense or spasm, potentially even long after you've died. The various sphincters of the human body will eventually relax, and if there's anything backed up in said orifice, various muscular processes that may continue for a bit can more easily push stuff out, as well as potential gas buildup over time having a similar effect. This is particularly likely with trauma or seizures that result in death, which makes pooping and peeing either directly before or after death virtually guaranteed, unless the person recently emptied their waste disposal factories. Beyond this, something that can aid this after-death pooping and peeing process is the movement of the body itself. While you might not have previously soiled yourself, depending on how your body was handled and potentially combined with any gas present, it may result in a buildup of abdominal pressure that squeezes the poop and pee out when you're moved, not unlike squeezing toothpaste from a toothpaste tube, just, less minty fresh. So, to conclude, while seemingly not as common as certain Hollywood depictions such as South Park might indicate, defecating after death does happen in a not insignificant percentage of cases. This is actually kind of fitting when you think about it. Likely the first thing you ever did when you entered the world was start consuming milk, and there is a reasonable chance that the last thing you'll ever do in this world is empty your bladder and colon of their contents. But fret not at this potential less than dignified exit to this world. If your religious affiliation aligns right, soon enough your hugger will travel to Valhalla, where you'll someday have the badass honor of fighting alongside Thor and Odin during Ragnarok. But hey, if you're not ready for that just yet, if you want all of the fun of battle without, the real death and the horror, well, you should absolutely check out War Thunder. I'm going to tell you a little bit about them before we get into the bonus fact today. War Thunder is a realistic free-to-play military vehicle combat game. It's available on PC, PS4, and Xbox One. You also don't need to purchase War Thunder. You can download it for free and play. Like I say, that's what the link below is good for. In this game, there are over 1,200 historically accurate vehicles all the way way from 1920 to the 1990s. They've all been carefully built and they're incredibly detailed. You can see, by the physics that they've really been sweated over. It's all very, very good, plus incredible sound to go along with it. Then look, you can just jump in for a quick game on War Thunder in arcade mode, useful if you don't have much time, or you can play realistic and go for some more challenging stuff, or if you're really hardcore, you can play simulator if you like getting your ass whipped over and over again. So if you want to join us on the battlefield for free, use the link below. Doing that also supports this show. It really does make a difference in us putting out these daily videos. So why not go through our War Thunder link and try it out? Also, not just a benefit for us, you'll also get a free premium tank or aircraft and 3 days of premium time as a bonus just for registering. And let's get into that bonus fact, shall we? Speaking of microbes in your abdomen, it turns out that you can brew alcohol with some of them. And yes, you can do this in your body. In fact, endogenous alcohol production, or auto-brewery syndrome to give it its cooler name, was first described in medicine in 1972 in Japan. Very few cases are ever reported, presumably because the syndrome requires an unusual set of circumstances to cause noticeable symptoms. In all of the known cases, some sort of yeast ferments sugars coming from carbohydrates or any sugary foods into ethanol, that's ethyl alcohol. Should enough ethanol be produced, you can even actually get drunk. In fact, different types of yeast producing ethanol in our digestive tracts is very common. One study of people suspected of having auto-brewery syndrome showed 61% of the people had an increase in their blood alcohol level when given oral glucose, that's sugar. Another study done in the United Arab Emirates showed that while this alcohol production was common, the production was too low to have any forensic significance. Basically, people don't complain because the amount of alcohol produced didn't give them any symptoms. Although that same study noted that the average blood alcohol level of the participants was approximately 0.034%, which is almost half the legal limit to drive in most US states. This can particularly be a problem for people of Japanese descent. About 50% of Japanese people have a mutated gene that leaves the liver unable to properly filter alcohol. This result leads these people to being unable to quickly get rid of the alcohol in their system, which in turn means they remain drunk longer. So essentially, smaller amounts of alcohol produced over time build up to make them drunk, whereas other bodies simply might be able to filter out the alcohol quickly enough so that no noticeable symptoms occur. Of course, fully fledged auto-brewery syndrome causing noticeable symptoms in people is very rare and usually takes something in your body not functioning quite correctly in order for it to occur. For example, consider the case of one Texas man who, during treatment for an infection, was given copious amounts of antibiotics and then directly after had brewer's yeast more or less take over his gut before other microbes could firmly establish. This result was a perpetually drunken Texan who wasn't actually drinking. Eventually, doctors figured out the problem and, fortunately, it was easily fixed. So I really hope you found that video interesting. If you did, give us a thumbs up below. Why not? Also subscribe. Why not? Hit that notification bell. Why not? But more importantly, check out that link to War Thunder below. Like I say, going through that does help support this show. It keeps us going in our daily videos. That's about it, guys. Thank you for watching.